What about second breakfast?
Time for second breakfast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Second Breakfast. It's me, Monster, from Breakdowns for Breakfast. So, today I wanted to talk about a very weird story that might feel like it doesn't belong with what we typically talk about on Breakdowns for Breakfast, but it does involve a couple of musicians, so I think it's, close enough that I can tell this story, because I will tell this story to anybody who will listen. If anybody remembers the podcast that we do not speak of, I did a full episode on this guy, and I felt like it was music related enough that it gave me an excuse to talk about it again. So today I want to tell you guys the story of Philip Taylor Kramer. Now that name may or may not sound familiar, but his story, to me at least, is fascinating. And there are some musical tie-ins, so let's get into it. I think this one's going to be a little bit longer than usual, but that's okay. This is a story worth telling, and it's worth listening to. So I hope you find it as interesting as I do. Just sit back, relax, let Monster tell you the tale of Mr. Philip Taylor Kramer. So Philip Taylor Kramer was born on July 12, 1952 in Youngstown, Ohio. As a child, Kramer was interested in astronomy. When Kramer was 5 in 1957, the Soviet Union put its first satellite into space. Then in 1962, JFK announced that America would be putting a man on the moon. This all contributed to Kramer's fascination with space. His father, Ray Kramer, was the head of the electrical engineering department at Youngstown State University. Kramer would go and sit with his father at work and listen to him talk about space travel. Kramer was so into science, at the age of 12, he and his father had created a laser that had the power to shoot down balloons. It won first place at his school science fair. And rightfully it should, because if you're shooting lasers in elementary school, you're either a genius or a supervillain, or possibly both. Kramer loved science, but the older he got, the more into music he became. He formed his first band while he was still a teenager. In 1974, he moved to LA to pursue a music career. Now, not long after that, he met a guy named Ron Bushy. Bushy was the drummer and one of the founding members of the band Iron Butterfly. Now, you might not know that name right off the top of your head, but I guarantee you know at least one Iron Butterfly song, known as In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, or In the Garden of Eden, if you're sober. That was the story, was the name of the song was supposed to be In the Garden of Eden, but the singer was so drunk that it came out, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, baby, and they just ran with it because it was catchy. I don't know. Either way, it's a cool song. Maybe not the 25, 35 minute long version, but the regular version is good. So anyway, in 1968, Iron Butterfly released the song In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, and Kramer met Bushy in 1974. So Iron Butterfly wasn't really around anymore, and most of the original members had quit. However, Bushy did get the band kind of back together, and Kramer became their bass player. Iron Butterfly's earlier material had sort of this like psychedelic proggy sound, a lot of organs. It was kind of similar to the Doors in a lot of ways. Maybe not quite as bluesy as the Doors, a little more proggy. Kramer played on 2 of the group's albums. He played on Scorching Beauty and Sun and Steel. Both of these were released in 1975. And these albums are a little more straightforward 70s psychedelic rock. They're not as heavy on the organ, and they're not quite as proggy. After this, Iron Butterfly breaks up, and Kramer would continue to play music with Ron Bushy in the groups Magic and Gold between 1977 and 1980. Now, if you Google Magic and you Google Gold, it's hard to find a whole lot about those bands, especially since there is a white boy reggae band called Magic with the little exclamation point. You probably know them too. They had one song, "Well, you gotta be so cruel." I actually really liked that song, but hey, my favorite band's 311, so what do you expect? So in 1980, Kramer went back to school. Even while touring in his bands, he was still obsessed with numbers and equations and would often be seen scribbling mathematical equations on restaurant napkins and hotel stationery. Now, while Kramer was still in school, he became a contractor for the U.S. Department of Defense. On his first day on the job, he had to raise his right hand and swear an oath of allegiance to the United States. He had to keep everything under lock and key and worked on whatever covert operations they gave him. Kramer did eventually get a degree in aerospace engineering. Now, because of the covert nature of most of the projects Kramer worked on, it's hard to say what all programs he officially worked on. However, it seems very likely he worked on a nuclear warhead missile known as the MX. The bomb was designed to hit targets on the other side of the world. Kramer worked on the navigation tech so the rocket would be incredibly accurate. He even had to hide what he was doing from his own colleagues. Water break. In 1987, Kramer got married to a woman named Jennifer, who already had a son. And in 1990, they had a baby girl together named Haley. At this point, Kramer decided he was ready for a little bit of a more normal 9-to-5 style job so he would have more time with his kids. Well, in 1990, Kramer opened a tech company. In 1991, his small company merged with a bigger tech company ran by a man by the name of Randy Jackson. No, not American Idol Randy Jackson. Yes, Michael Jackson's brother from the Jackson 5, Randy Jackson. And they named their company Total Multimedia Inc. Now, supposedly they worked on video-based educational tools, and they developed data compression techniques for CD-ROMs. They claim they were the first to develop the first video compression capable of producing full motion videos from a single-speed CD-ROM in 1992. Now, for us laymen and not super smart science engineer folks, I think what they're referring to is basically like back in the day for us old folks, you had things like Real Player on your computer that would show like 30-second clips. They were not high res. They were very blurry, probably like what my webcam looks like today. They weren't the 4K 1080 that we're used to now. But it was cutting edge at the time because most CD-ROMs weren't showing full motion video. So like QuickTime Real Player style videos. Now, Kramer was almost too smart for his own good. A lot of his ideas were very ambitious, and the investors in the company weren't seeing the results fast enough to justify the amount of money they were putting into the company. So in 1994, the company was reorganized under bankruptcy and hired new leadership. Kramer continued working there, though he was profoundly affected by the bankruptcy and reorganization. He told colleagues he was working on a huge, life-changing project. He never gave any details to what this project was or what he was doing. He just kept telling everybody once he figured it out, it would change the world. Nobody knows for 100% certainty what he was actually researching, but it is believed it had something to do with light speed travel. I think he was trying to find the secret to time travel. Now, his coworkers were noticing increasing obsessive behavior. He stayed in the office working on equations long after they had gone home. By late January in 1995, he was no longer sleeping at night and was pretty much working nonstop 24 hours a day. He believed rest would only delay his discovery. He felt he was on the cusp of getting it. Now, getting what? Again, who knows for sure? Now, February 11th, 1995. Kramer went to his father Ray's house, and Kramer told his dad he only had 40 cents and desperately needed money. That's important. Remember that. 40 cents. Ray said his son looked burnt out and exhausted. Ray sent his son away and told him he didn't need money, he needed rest. He tried to go to sleep, but kept waking up in the middle of the night and going to work on his laptop. The next morning, Kramer seemed to be feeling much better. He made his wife a cup of coffee, and he headed out the door. February 12th, 1995, Kramer went to his father-in-law's house. Father-in-law, so dad now his father-in-law. Kramer gave him a kaleidoscope and cryptically said to him, "It's all right here." Then, Kramer left and headed to LAX to pick up a guy by the name of Greg Martini. Martini was one of Kramer's old colleagues who was in town on business. Kramer was going to drop him off at his hotel. Now, this is where it gets weird and creepy. And if you know me, on a level besides Breakdowns for Breakfast, I love weird and creepy. So, here you go. Kramer entered the airport parking lot alone. He was driving his green Aerostar van. 45 minutes later, he left the airport, but he didn't have Greg Martini with him. At some point after that, Kramer called his wife Jennifer and asked her to explain the situation to Martini. The situation being, Kramer left without Martini but planned on meeting him and Jennifer at Martini's hotel later that afternoon. He also told his wife he had a big surprise for her. She had no clue what Kramer was talking about. Kramer proceeded to make 16 calls to other friends and family, and at 11:59 a.m. he made his last call. It was to 911. When the operator answered, Kramer said, "I'm going to kill myself, and I want everyone to know O.J. Simpson is innocent. They did it." Now, this is supposedly in reference to video evidence in which Taylor was hired just before his disappearance to analyze the authenticity of a videotape that the FBI and the DEA had on the O.J. Simpson murder trial. All I can think is that because he was in big tech and he had worked on this video software program, that perhaps they thought he had a capability to maybe look at this video evidence and see something a little bit different. And again, because we don't really know exactly what he was up to, who knows? Maybe that's not even true. But don't worry, it gets stranger. So Jennifer and Greg Martini waited in the hotel lobby for hours, waiting on Kramer to show up. He never did. He's now officially missing. For the next several days, Jennifer and other friends and family passed out several thousands of flyers around Los Angeles to try and find Kramer. It didn't take long before the police were getting several calls from people saying they saw Kramer in their towns. He was spotted at a bus stop in West L.A. Then a pawn shop owner near where Kramer used to live said he saw a tall man with a wedding ring enter his store shortly after Kramer went missing. He was apparently very interested in the computers at the pawn shop. Other reports said he was seen at a soup kitchen, Burger King, and at the Santa Monica Pier. However, none of these leads had much success in tracking down Kramer. Early March 1995, an elderly couple said they saw a man at the grocery store that matched Kramer's description in a little town about 30 miles away from LA. The man approached the couple and told them he needed money to call his family. He only had 40 cents. Bum, bum, bum. Coincidence? Or maybe it was Kramer. So a few days later, Jennifer got a call at their home. The person on the other end was just breathing, then took a pause, and then started saying hello, hello, hello. Jennifer said the person sounded out of it and confused and nervous. She was startled, and it took her a minute to respond. The caller hung up before she could say anything, but Jennifer was convinced that was Kramer. This reignited Jennifer's desire to search for her husband, and she spent the next several months getting Kramer's story out to the public. Unsolved Mysteries, Oprah Winfrey, and even America's Most Wanted all ran episodes on him. The FBI even got involved. However, interest eventually waned, and no leads and no new developments came to life for years. No body, no evidence, until May 1999. May 29th, 1999. Photographer Walter Lockwood and one of his buddies were out on a hike in a ravine below Decker Canyon Road near Malibu, California. The road was winding and was full of garbage and broken down, decaying vehicles. During the hike, Lockwood noticed a totaled Aerostar minivan. The windshield was shattered and the hood of the car was crumpled up. It sat directly under Decker Canyon Road. The drop would have been roughly 450 feet. Lockwood approached the van with intentions to take pictures of the damaged van. When he got close, he saw a long, thin object sticking out of the driver's side window. It was a human bone. There was a decaying human corpse in the driver's seat. As Lockwood stumbled around, he accidentally stepped on a hard, round object and almost fell down. It was a human skull. The skull of the corpse in the driver's seat had detached and rolled a few feet away from the van. When police arrived, they found Kramer's ID in the van. Over the next few months, after several tests and studies, the coroner said cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. There's no way to prove exactly what happened, but it was deemed a likely suicide. There wasn't a lot of evidence to point to suicide, however. Kramer had made that 911 call right before he disappeared, where he said he was going to kill himself, so they just kind of ran with that. Now, however, Kramer's family was not convinced and believed the authorities were covering something up. Kramer's father never believed he killed himself and is quoted as saying, "Taylor had told me a long time before there were people bothering him. They wanted what he was doing, and some of them threatened him. He once told me, if I ever say I'm gonna kill myself, don't you believe it one bit. I'll be needing help." So that's it. That's the story of Philip Taylor Kramer. It is weird, it is creepy, but it's about a musician, so how could I resist? As I said a few minutes ago, if you don't know Monster on a personal level, I'm a huge horror fan. I love conspiracy theories. I love creepy stuff. So when I came across this story, I immediately was hooked. And there's a bunch of other stuff like this that I like that given the right opportunity, perhaps I will tell some more of those stories. But I thought this was a really fun one, and it did pertain to music. There are a couple musicians in the story. Obviously, Philip Taylor Kramer from Iron Butterfly. That's, the main thing there. But yeah, if you think this is really cool and you'd like to hear more weird, creepy stories like this, whether they pertain to music or not, which, by the way, there's plenty that involve musicians and, have a musical component. So that will not be hard. But if you find this a little more interesting than just band histories or whatever, give us your feedback. breakdownsbreakfast@gmail.com. Obviously, hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, X, all of those places. And yeah, thank you for tuning in, and I hope you have a great day.